My theory was that there was an issue with the blades on the max prop.
Tip wobble is exactly what it sounds like.
I've heard so many stories of putting boats in the water and the gearbox being the wrong way round.
However, there was a bigger issue.
We think there is a mismatch between the gearbox reduction ratio and the size of the prop. Well, here we are back in the garden, which I'm calling it, since we're on the grass, as you can see. First time we've done that. We've returned to Esper after a long break of 6 weeks, I think it's been, which is possibly the longest we've ever been off the boat since we bought her, I think. There may have been one time in India when we went back for 2 months perhaps. But anyway, it's now time to start tackling some of those jobs. If you remember, I was alluding to an issue which I didn't like addressing. I kept skirting it. I didn't want to talk about it while we were on passage. That was an issue with this knocking sound that we were getting. It was a bit sporadic. It didn't relate to any particular speed. My theory was that there was an issue with the blades on the max prop. So we actually took the max prop back to the UK. We got it tuned by Darglow Engineering based down in Dorset. I had a very long chat with them on the phone. I was on the phone for about 3/4 of an hour discussing some of the issues that we have with our prop in relation to our Beta 60 engine. The upshot of it all was that we think there is a mismatch between the gearbox reduction ratio and the size of the prop.
A quick lesson on hydrodynamics will help explain one of the issues we have on board Esper. A propeller converts torque into thrust by moving water down behind the blades. Each blade is twisted, which provides lift, much like an aeroplane wing. The key measurements of a prop are its diameter, its pitch, the rotation, and the number of blades. The diameter is self-explanatory, measured from the tip of the blade to the hub in the centre, and then doubled. Esper has a relatively large 21-inch diameter prop. To understand pitch, think of the prop as a screw, which is another name often given to propellers. If the prop was a screw being screwed into a piece of wood, it's the theoretical distance the prop would travel as it completes one revolution, were it not fixed. Increase the blade angle and you increase the pitch. Our blades are set at an angle of 16 degrees, which is a pitch of 11.3. A third factor that needs to be considered is the RPM of the shaft. This is dictated by the gearbox and its reduction ratio. A reduction gearbox reduces the output speed or rotation of the shaft relative to the input speed from the engine. Reducing the RPM of the shaft relative to the RPM of the engine makes the prop more efficient as it increases the torque. Our gearbox ratio is 2. That is, the revolutions from the engine are halved. Walk around a boatyard and you'll see many different types of props: 2-blade, 3-blade, 4-blade, fixed, feathering and folding. They each have their pros and cons, but since we inherited our Max Prop Classic when we bought Esper, we're dealing with a 3-blade feathering type. This design allows us to alter the angle of the blades to increase or decrease the pitch relative to the reduction ratio of the gearbox. One of the issues we suspected we had aboard Esper was the lack of torque our max prop produced. We noticed this when motoring in company on the East Malaysia Rally when Esper struggled to maintain 5.5 knots. Putting this down to age and wear, we took the prop back to the UK where Darglow examined and serviced it.
They are prop specialists and they are able to service the max prop. So this is basically look at the alignment and to make sure that it runs true.
Sure enough, there are a few issues, including too much tip wobble. Tip wobble is exactly what it sounds like: lateral movement in the blades when in a stationary position. Our blades were indeed loose, and this was caused by wear in the spacer that was offsetting the position of the blades. To solve this, Darglo made a shim which corrected the undesired lateral movement. Darglo recommends tuning your prop once every 5 or 6 years. We service our prop every time we haul out, but this was the first time we'd got the prop tuned in over 17 years. However, there was a bigger issue Darglo identified. We were not producing the right torque because our blade diameter is oversized, meaning it's overworking to produce the correct torque. But how can this be if that spot was fitted by the previous owner all those years ago? Back in 2017, we installed a new Beta engine, which was fitted with a new gearbox. Beta ships out a standard gearbox ratio of 2 unless otherwise specified. And that's where we'd cocked up, because the correct reduction ratio for a 21-inch max prop on an Oyster 435 is actually 2.45. That is, for a larger prop, the shaft needs to be spinning more slowly for its optimum performance. With a gearbox ratio of just 2, our prop is being overworked. But the max prop blades can be altered to reduce the pitch, I hear you say. Unfortunately, they were already set for lowest pitch possible, so it wasn't feasible to change them further. This left us with several solutions.
Replace the prop for a correctly sized one. If we went for a feathering prop, that's a good £3,000. The second option, of course, is to change the gearbox itself. That's probably about £1,200 plus, of course. With both these items, we've got to either source them here, which wouldn't happen, or we'd have to import them. So you can add a few hundred more on that as well, plus extra delays.
Option 3, a new fixed prop. We'd already rejected this idea because there were too many disadvantages of fixed props on sailboats.
Another option that Darglo suggested was that you could actually grind down the blade, so take it from a 21-inch diameter to something like a 19-inch. But of course you're kind of committed then, aren't you? So
we came up with an inevitable fourth solution: to stick with what we have and hope that the service prop would be an improvement on what we were already used to.
I've done this many times, I've recorded this many times, and I continue to do so that I have a reference for myself, because with a feathering prop, of course, it's a geared system, and this means that you've got to change the pitch to best match your gearbox ratio.
He sounds like he knows what he's talking about, right? Well, it's true. Jamie's undertaken this procedure many times, but honestly, there are so many opportunities for error when assembling a classic max prop. You can sometimes get things a bit wrong. Keep watching.
So here we have the central spinner, which is made up of 2 halves. This is the body of the prop assembly, and we put those on around the central hub on the end there. You can just see that. But before we do that, we need to take the gear cone and get this positioned in the right place. Now, this gear cone has a number of letters on the front, and that needs to be lined up with the end here. You can see there are a number of letters here, so using the reference chart provided by Max Prop and knowing the angle of the blades, and we understand they should be at 16 degrees, we use the table provided in the Max Prop guide, and we line up where 16 degrees is, and it is telling us it should be aligned with the letter C here. So that's now in place, but the canny among you will know that of course this all needs to be greased up first, but I just wanted to show you how that slots into place. The second stage is to put the spinner together, made of those 2 halves. So what I'm going to do now is just going to grease up the inside of the spinner on both sides here using some grease supplied by Darglo, which of course is a marine grease, and we also grease up the gear hub as well before putting those on. Here you can see I've applied a liberal amount of grease into the spinner in both halves. You don't want to go overboard with this stuff, A, because it's not cheap, it's expensive grease, but more importantly, most of this will extrude out when you push the 2 halves together and tighten it up, and you end up wasting quite a bit of grease. So if that does happen, then obviously keep hold of your container and try and catch the excess grease before it drops on the floor. This part I definitely won't be able to record because this is going to need 2 pairs of hands ideally, and I've only got one. The next thing now is to align a hole in here which Max Prop called the Y spot, and we can't see it, it's covered in grease, but it's there. There's a little hole in there. That has to align now with one of the letters on the front of the gear hub. We've got the K lined up with the hole, and I should really remember this. I should just remember K hole. We're going through the K hole, so the letter K there is lined up with this hole. It's difficult to see, but there's a hole drilled in there which is pre-drilled by Max Prop themselves. So that's what you do, you line that up. What you'll also find on mine is that the previous owner many years ago had got the installer to actually score a mark on the spinner and a mark on the rear shim at the back here. So when those two are lined up there, the K is in line with the hole. So if you're installing this for the first time and you know you've got your gearing right here, it could be worth doing this, because the next stage now is to actually put the blades on, and it's a lot easier to make sure or to view this here than it is that in there. This is the spinner. This is what each individual blade slots onto. The first thing you'll notice is that they are numbered 1, 2 and 3. And each blade is also numbered 1, 2 and 3, so it's important to get each blade on correctly. The second thing you'll notice that's slightly different to ours is we have this shim. When we gave our blade to Darglow, the blade was quite loose, so what they've been able to do is to straighten off number 2 on the actual hub itself, and they've put a shim in place just to even it out. They have very kindly even embossed the word out onto it so that we know that that side faces out, and I've just marked number 2 on it in case it falls off and I remember which one that goes onto. So that is the next step, is to slide the blades onto this, and then lifting them up into their feathered position, we place them onto the back of the hub here, and you'll see each blade has a geared serrated edge which slots in place in here. Perhaps the single most important thing is to get your blades on the right way round. So the leading edge, which is forward, pointing forward, is your straight edge, and the trailing edge is the curved one at the back here. That's the first thing. The second thing is that when we put them on in their feathered position, so that's as flat as you look at them if you were looking up, they would be flat rather than curved. The other thing is to make sure that you've got these in perfect alignment. That is, that this here sits absolutely straight on this point here, and it's very easy to set these blades on and have them slightly at an angle. So rather than being like this, it's quite easy to have them tilted at an angle. I know from experience, because when we were in the Maldives in the boatyard, I accidentally put one of the blades on wrong. We went back in the water and we could motor at a maximum of 2 knots. There's a long story behind that, involving a diver and a dive school and 1 hour underwater having to take it all apart.
When we put the prop back together, we are happy to report that it was a much tighter fit and the blades no longer wobbled. Now, I said Jamie has undertaken this procedure many times, and you'd think the Max Prop would be the least of our worries, right? Wrong. We've got more boat maintenance to show you in the coming episodes, but let's just roll on a few weeks to the moment we dropped back in the water, when this happened.
Well, as you may be able to see, we're in the water. Look, hurrah! So that's good, isn't it? There's a problem though. As we were trying to reverse out of the cradles to get ourselves clear of this jetty here and onto a mooring, nothing happened. And it took us a while to realise that something is reversed. When we put the boat into a stern, we go forwards. When we put the boat forwards, we go backwards. It's a right-hand turn gearbox. The shaft is turning to the right when we put it into gear. So it can only be the prop. Now bear in mind, I have taken this prop apart and put it back together so many times I can do it blindfolded. The prop, being a feathering prop made of many parts, can be altered to be a left-hand turn or a right-hand turn, and it seems to me that it's been put back together to be a left-hand turn. You've heard about this happening so many times. I've heard so many stories of putting boats in the water and the gearbox being the wrong way round. But yeah, this time I'm pretty sure it's the prop.
Sure enough, when we checked, the hub was not aligned correctly. This is curious though, because the correct position is to align the letter K with the hole, which you saw me do earlier. And yet when we checked after hauling again, it was not in that position. Now, I'm not one to point fingers, but I wasn't the only one who was tampering with the prop while it was out the water. But at least we solved the issue. If nothing else, this demonstrates how the max prop can be used for both the left-hand turn and the right-hand turn shaft, and how important it is to get the gearing correct for your setup.